Hi all. I'm conscious this is meant to be a lightning talk. We've got 3 presenters and even getting through our title has used up about half of our time. So I'll try and be super succinct in describing the raw materials this project is based on. Basically, the British Library for Development Studies Legacy Collection is a unique library collection of over 250,000 items drawn from 150 different countries across the global south. The materials collected by the Institute of Development Studies, based at the University of Sussex, from the 1960s to the 1990s. The type of material includes government reports, censuses, newsletters, journals, books, pamphlets and other ephemera. The subject areas covered include all aspects of development studies, most notably economics, population and family planning, education, and health. Whilst most of this material is held somewhere in the world, nowhere else has gathered together a collection like this, and some of the holdings are literally unique. So it's obviously of interest to lots of people, including the Wellcome Trust, who have just funded a 3-year project for me and others to preserve, catalogue and promote the collection. But why is it of interest to Tim and Alice? To massively paraphrase, it's of interest to Tim because of its size. The fact that we have created over 30,000 marked catalogue records, complete with Library of Congress subject headings and customised British Library for Development Studies themes, immediately provides sufficient big data to allow for experimentation and visualisation. And it's of interest to Alice for 2 reasons. Firstly, because of its authors and content. Unlike the vast majority of Sussex library collections, and I would suspect UK research library collections in general, these materials originate from the global south. As such, they provide opportunities for decolonisation by privileging normally excluded voices and subjects. The second reason I think Alice is interested is to do with how the materials are described and organised. They may have been written and produced by Global South actors, but they are still being catalogued and organised based on Eurocentric epistemologies, exactly the sort of systemic colonial influence that her work at Sussex is dedicated to unpicking. But much as I love the BLDS collection, you don't need me to mansplain what other people should find interesting about it. Let's hand over to first Tim and then Alice to hear what they think.
Okay, it's a lightning talk, so you will have to forgive me for going quickly on this. We have 4 minutes to do a whiz-bang tour of space and time. So let's start first with space. This is the visualization we came up with of the BLDS data that was particularly helpful. So with this, you have to imagine that, say, all of the publications you have in the collection from India are all piled up on top of each other, extending into space. So really, that just gives you a very quick, immediate idea of how the data is distributed. I really like this graph. Yes, because it is needlessly pretty and you can interact with the world by dragging it round, but also because for once the bells and whistles are not just needless window dressing. By presenting it this way in 3D, I think you get a very immediate conception of the way the data patterns are working. So from looking at space, let's move on to looking at time and space. This time we move to a 2D graph, this representing the year 1900 and the amount of records of publications we have from each country in that year. We can play this one forwards in time. So we can watch the BLDS collection grow by year. So as we can see in the opening part of the century, we have publications from all over cropping up, but nothing very concentrated. As we get to the middle of the century, and especially to the 60s where the university is founded and the BLDS is founded, we really get to watch the collection development play out in real time in front of our eyes. So we've already looked at how the data is distributed within the BLDS collection itself. So I wanted to have a look and see what picture that painted if we looked at the entirety of the library's holdings. So I came up with a similar graph, a similar globe, but this time containing all 650-something thousand of University of Sussex Library's physical items. So let's see whether that statistically gives us any points of interest to see whether the breakdown in the BLDS collection maps onto the overall whole. And it doesn't. So those of you who are very astute in terms of data may notice that there is an extreme preponderance of publications in this country here, to a lesser extent, but still a huge one, this country here, followed by, at a great distance, the rest of the world. Whether that says anything or not about the need to decolonize, I will leave to you to decide. Now, the biggest difficulty I encountered when coming up with the visualizations didn't actually arise from visualizing the data or coding up a 3D globe. It actually arose from a quirk of the MARC data. Hence, one thing that I hadn't factored in when I started the work was that there are two places in the MARC record where a country of publication can come to rest. There is the 264 tag, where if we look at this example, I see indeed country of publication Zimbabwe. But if I go up here to the 008 and look at the country code here, I see RH from the old days of Rhodesia. This causes me problems because there is a disharmony of data here. It confused me when I did the first graphs because I did them based on the 264, so I was not comprehensively getting everything that had an RH in the tag here. But also it snookered me so far in my attempts to make a custom search of our catalogue, which would allow us to search by country of publication, because our Primo catalogue searches based on the 264. So I would somehow need to be able to prompt people to do a search for, where country of publication is Zimbabwe or Rhodesia or several other options that can legitimately appear in here that all have the RH country code. So this presents me with an interesting thinking point, and set me thinking or dreaming about how a more linked data future might be able to help me overcome and fill in the gaps of this sort of historic disharmony of data.
And hi everyone. I got involved in this project as part of my current AHRC-RL UK Research Fellowship project, which focuses on the library's current and historical role in calls to decolonise the university. I don't have time to explain more about this now, but you can read about my project on my blog via the link at the top of this slide. My research methods are very qualitative, so I turned to colleagues like Tim and Danny to ask for help in exploring the more quantitative aspects of collections data. When I discovered they were experimenting with visual mapping prototypes to visualize BLDS Legacy Collections, this was music to my ears, and I began collaborating with them on how to develop these tools, with me being the person to ask lots of pertinent questions about why and how the collections data is configured the way it is. Sussex and IDS libraries were forged in the early 1960s at a significant historical juncture of geopolitical change in a post-war, post-imperial era, with the forces of international development and decolonisation being shaped at the same time by often neo-colonial logics of nation-building and knowledge-building. So whilst on the one hand the BLDS legacy map on the left shows a concentration of collections originating in the global south and hence might indicate an overall decolonial picture, that does not mean that all the items are themselves of a decolonial nature. Many of them have their roots in colonial and neo-colonial organisations and operations. And how they are catalogued reflects this. Also, whilst the picture of Tim's globe graph of the library's main collection on the right-hand side here quite starkly indicates a massive concentration of publications from Britain and North America, an image that reminds me of Star Wars for some reason, that does not tell the whole story either. We need to dig more deeply into the granular reasoning behind these metadata maps to understand the stories behind the bubbles and columns. As Tim has already highlighted, the disharmony of data present in the way in which the place of publication is catalogued complicates how the country has been named and codified, which impacts on the user end of discovery. Searching Primo with the keyword Zimbabwe via the country of publication field returns far fewer results than appears via the mapping tool. Adding Boolean synonyms increases the results but misses items that have been catalogued with further place names like towns and cities. We can't expect people to search by cryptic country code, nor can we advise them to search for all historical versions of a country's name. So what solutions might be possible for generating inclusive and representative collection datasets for visual mapping? Is linked data the way forward, as Tim suggests? We'd love to hear your thoughts. But for my interests, this example raises a decolonial discovery conundrum which highlights the geopolitical and linguistic power of naming and mapping collections through colonial and post-colonial time and space. In his 1990 book, The Invention of Africa, Mudimbe invokes the paradigm of the colonial library to describe the many intersecting ways in which African land and lives have been and continue to be colonised via Eurocentric systems and representations of knowledge. He reminds us that the term colonial derives from the Latin root colere, meaning to design, arrange or cultivate, practices that enforce Eurocentric hierarchies and orders of knowledge by violently rearranging indigenous lands and bodies of knowledge. It is important for library professionals engaged in the various applications of metadata to consider the ways in which these colonial legacies and logics might appear in bibliographic fields and systems, thereby generating biases in library discovery that can have significant implications for research design and methodologies. The BLDS mapping tools have the potential to be an invaluable library teaching and research resource, informing decolonial approaches to teaching critical information literacy as well as research methodologies. And Danny and I are in the process of developing collaborative workshops embedded on a range of Sussex degree programmes that use these tools and resources. And through those workshops, we're highlighting how colonial epistemologies are encoded into library systems and scholarly publishing conventions. But to do that, we need to work with our systems librarians and our cataloguers and anyone working with metadata to help this be a three-dimensional conversation. So to conclude, we want to emphasise the importance of cross-departmental collaboration, experimentation and play for exploring the spatial and temporal possibilities of collections, data and discovery work, which necessarily involves a healthy level of critique in order to recreate more inclusive and representative systems of knowledge.